here, and just wanted to welcome you all to participating with us. A couple book passage things. We've got two locations. We have our location in the Ferry Building in San Francisco, and we also have our store in Corte Madera. Right now, both stores are open 7 days a week for your shopping pleasure. So come on in. You can come into the store and browse. You can order online, or think about this retro idea. You can actually pick up the phone, dial us, and order books that way. Yeah, we are still doing that. So any way you'd like to buy your books, please come in. We would love to be your primary book supplier. I want to thank all of our loyal customers out there who are tuning in today. We really appreciate your business. To be honest, we would not be here today without you. As we all know, most businesses have struggled for the last 2 years. So Book Passage is so grateful to our loyal supporters. And if we've got new friends out there, new customers, well, welcome. We hope that Book Passage will be your primary stop for all your book needs. Okay, we have a very, very active spring and summer event calendar. I do not want any of you to miss any of the great events that we have coming up. I'm just going to mention a few. We've got Detective Paul Holes in the Corte Madera store tomorrow, Thursday at 1 p.m. Now, Paul Holes is the cold case detective who cracked the Golden State Killer case, the J.C. Dugard case, and the Lacey Peterson case. He will be discussing his latest book, Unmasked. This is a great event for all of us true crime fans. Again, it's 1 p.m. tomorrow. This is a ticketed event. Tickets are still available. And we also have a signing with celebrity chef Andy Bargani in our San Francisco store. That will take place on Saturday, May 28th at 1 p.m. Chef Bargani is releasing his newest cookbook, The Cook You Want to Be. This is a free in-person event, so we hope you will join us. Check out our calendar. We have a lot of activities on there. We have classes, we have in-person events, and we have online events. Very busy spring and summer schedule. Here at Book Passage, our mission is to enrich, engage, and inspire. And Book Passage has been a Bay Area institution and a family-owned business for over 40 years. So again, thank you to all of our customers out there. We hope to be serving you for another 40 years. Well, like millions of women, V, formerly known as Eve Ensler, has been waiting much of her lifetime for an apology. Sexually and physically abused by her father, V has struggled her whole life with this betrayal, longing for an honest reckoning with a man who is long dead. Called shatteringly brilliant by the New York Times, profound, imaginative, devastating by The Guardian, the apology is both courageous, transformative, and yes, healing. V, formerly known as Eve Ensler, is a Tony Award-winning playwright, author, performer, and activist. She's well known as the best-selling author of The Vagina Monologues, which we all love. This has been published in 48 languages and performed in more than 140 countries. It's a New York Times bestseller, and she's also written the New York Times bestseller, I Am an Emotional Creature, and many, many other titles. She is the founder of V-Day, the global activist movement to end violence against women and girls, and 1 Billion Rising, the largest global mass action to end gender-based violence. She is one of Newsweek's 150 women who changed the world. That is a huge honor. And she's also The Guardian's 100 most influential women. She lives in New York, and we are so thrilled to have her here with us this afternoon. It is such an honor. She is joined today by Johann Hari. Johann is a writer and a journalist. He's written for the New York Times, Le Monde, The Guardian, and other newspapers. Now, his TED Talks have been viewed by over 70 million times, and his work has been praised by a broad range of people, from Oprah Winfrey to Noam Chomsky to Joe Rogan. His newest book, Stolen Focus, is available at Book Passage. So it is a great honor that we welcome to our virtual Book Passage stage, V and Johann.
Cheers, Cheryl. I'm so excited to be with you. I absolutely love Book Passage. and I'm really excited to be with V. You know, I always say about you, V, if you were a man, you would be regarded as the great engagé artist intellectual of our times, right? If I think about the work, the incredible work you've done that I've seen on the ground, from the Congo to Juarez in Mexico, and the staggering artistic achievement. And I always think about where this came from, right? The roots of this genius in these two domains. And the line that Rumi, the great Persian poet I know you love, said, you know, the wound is where the light enters you. And I feel like with this incredible book, The Apology, you've gone to the source of the wound. I remember that about 2 weeks after you started working on the book, you phoned me and you said, I'm writing this book as my father apologizing to me. And I remember thinking when we got off the call, this is either going to be an absolutely amazing book or terrible, right? I was like, this is such a high wire act. And it's astonishing that you pulled it off in the incredible way that you did. How can you just talk a bit about how the book first came to you, how this extraordinary literary inhabiting of your abusive father came to be?
Thank you, Johann. First of all, I'm so happy to be here today with you because I love you so much and you're truly one
Oh,
of the most brilliant people I know in this world.
oh,
And I love Book Passage. And to all of you out there who are listening, thank you for tuning in at your lunchtime. So appreciate you're with us. Um, how did this come to be? I think there were a set of circumstances that merged simultaneously. One was having been involved in the movement to end violence against women and girls for many, many years. Um, I had just really looked at this kind of escalation in the Me Too movement and was seeing all these men getting called out and seeing that none of them were coming forward to be accountable, to say what they had done, to make apologies, to make reckonings, to take responsibility. And I was kind of shocked that nobody was doing that, even though so many men were being called out. So I was starting to think, well, when have I ever heard a man make a public apology for sexual abuse? When have I ever heard a man make a public apology? Period. Do you know what I mean? But for sexual abuse particularly. So that was one piece. And then the other piece was that I think I waited my whole life for my father before he left this world to say he was sorry, to tell me to have grown in consciousness and understanding as he aged, and to think, oh my God, what did I do? I need to call that my daughter up and say to her, I was wrong. And not only did he not do that, he died believing he was right. And he died without even saying goodbye. Right. And even after his death, I would find myself going to the mailbox sometimes, waiting for a letter. I just had this kind of fantasy that some letter was going to be there that he had sent from some other world, just saying, I'm sorry. Because I think that most survivors or victims of violence, what do we long for more than anything in the world is we long for apologies. We long for accountability. We long for someone to tell us that they did what we know happened to us so we don't think we're insane for the rest of our lives, that we made it up, that it was our fault, that we brought it on ourselves, all those things. So I finally thought to myself, well, women aren't getting the apology they need. I'm not getting the apology I need. I'm going to write the apology for my father. I'm going to climb into him and I'm going to try to understand by being inside him what he went through, what his process was, what were all the factors that went into making him become the person he was, that was capable of doing what he did to me, and also make him responsible for owning and saying and telling me what he did to me. And that process was excruciating, but ultimately incredibly liberating.
So moving. And so I'm thinking about this process of you inhabiting this man who did these monstrous things, who did so much harm to you. What what did you begin to learn about your father as you did that?
Well, I think I want to say this. I think I couldn't have done this until I could do it. And I want to say it was at a moment in time and I was finally ready for it, because I think what had happened was I realized that so much of my life was controlled by my father, even 31 years after his death. I was always doing things to show him, to prove to him that he wasn't right about me, to prove I wasn't stupid, to prove I wasn't this, to prove I wasn't that. I was always in this dialogue of rage with him, and I didn't want to be in it anymore. So part of it was being willing which I had not been up until that point in my life, to try to understand why my father became who he became, not to justify it, not to let him off the hook, but to understanding. Understanding is very different than justifying. Understanding actually sets you free. And I think what was amazing, and it's very hard to explain this, once I made the decision that I was going to go into my father, he kind of showed up in this very kind of spiritual, psychological way. He was present. He was present through the whole writing of this book. And I don't know if it's that my father lived in me so deeply that I began to access parts of him that I had never known, or if he was actually sending me information. But what it was is I began to learn things about him. And I had some hints from my childhood, obviously, that led me into deeper alleyways. But I began to see things about him. I began to see how he was a product of patriarchy. I began to see how he had been an adored child. He was born long after all the other children, and he was adored, and he was put on a pedestal. But that adoration was not love. That adoration was turning him into something he wasn't, and was never allowing him to be who he truly was. And so he was always at odds with people's idea of him versus who he really knew he was. And that divide became wider and wider the older my father got. I think he had a very abusive brother. He had a very depressed father. He grew up in a time where men were in charge, where men knew everything, where men were, he grew up in patriarchy, unexamined patriarchy, unquestioned patriarchy. And I think I began to see how my father was really angry. He was really, really angry. And he was angry because people were telling him he was this person that he was not. And there was no place for him to ever say, I have doubt, I have sorrow, I have sadness, I don't want to be that person. And so he kind of adopted this persona and adopted this male mask, but underneath it, he was seething, he was broken, he was melancholy, he was sad. And I think all of that later fed into what happened between us.
That's so beautifully put, and obviously it's beautifully put throughout the book. And it's so true, as you put it, you have a very distinctive written and literary voice. And one of the things that most struck me when I started to read the book, when I read it early on, was, oh, this isn't V's voice, right? This is a very different voice. It sounds like a very different person. And I'm curious, one of the things that's so striking about it as well is it's such a work of love. And, it made me reflect on, it's always seemed to me so profoundly wrong, the idea that feminists somehow hate men. No one loves men more than feminists, right? Because feminists are the people who believe that men can be redeemed. And this book is such a work of love for your father. I'm just thinking about, how did it feel, you'd had so long of totally justifiably being enraged with this person who had done such harm. How did it feel to be exploring this other aspect of him?
Well, it's funny what you're saying about the language, because actually he knew words that I didn't know. He knew vocabulary that I have never used. It was just really interesting. Words would come out of his mouth and I'd be like, wow, I don't even know what that means. I have to look it up. Like, right. Like it really became his voice, and and I think part of what happened for me writing this book is that I began to really feel my father's brokenness. I began to feel how wounded my father was. I began to see how he had really dreamed, for example, of being a rabbi or being a writer or just being a man of philosophy. And he was kind of rammed into this 1950s idea of being a corporate president with a wife and children and a house in the suburbs, which I know he despised. He had no interest in. And I think it was because he was always trying to prove that he was that guy, that man that he was supposed to be. And I think one of the things that happened, writing this book, is I really, really tuned into my father's sorrow. I'd always experienced it, but it was on a much deeper level. And I also experienced where he was after death, that he was really kind of stuck in some realm where he was spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning because he couldn't get himself out of all he hadn't processed during his lifetime, all he hadn't dealt with during his lifetime. And I knew, even as I was writing it, that it was helping him get uncaught. Like, I knew he was grateful that I was doing this, that I had come to write into him so he could maybe get free from his own karma, his own unexamined history, right?
And it feels like it's not a coincidence that you were, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you were writing this extraordinary work of reckoning at a time of extraordinary social reckoning, both on white supremacy and on gender and the way men have behaved for forever. What did you see as the connection between those extraordinary social movements and the fact that you were doing this excavation of the root of the trauma in your own life?
Well, I think it's funny because my new book is called Reckoning, you know what I mean? And like, it's an extension in a way of the apology. I think this is what I believe to be true. And I think that there are basic pillars or columns of patriarchy, right, that hold it up. And one of them is the non-apology. I think men are taught from a very young age that they are never to apologize, never to expose weakness, never to show doubt, never to say they're wrong because it leaves them vulnerable. And so we live in a world where, for the things that matter, we rarely see a public apology, right? And what that does is it keeps things historically in their place, and it keeps the future repeating the same as the past. And I think one of the things I felt writing this book is that I hoped it would be a blueprint of contrition. I hoped it would be a blueprint where people could look at the steps that really went on in the book and begin to say, could we all enter into the process of the practice of apology? Because I think if we look at our history in this country, for sure, we have diabolical amnesia, right? We don't, and now with the right-wing pushback against critical race theory and against banning books and against teaching racism and against like this, because what apologies do, what guilt does, what feeling upset about something does is it opens your compassion. It makes you connected. It makes you responsible. It brings you into, guilt is like a psychic alarm that joins you to collective responsibility. And I think one of the things about an apology is that an apology is a form of accountability. In order to make it, you have to say it happened, and you have to say what you did and what the specifics were of what you did and what the details are of what you did. And you have to look at what's the impact of what you did on the person you did it to, and what's the long-term impact. And then what you're going to do about that to transform, and who are you? What went into you that made it possible for you to do the things you do? So if we go through that kind of examination individually, collectively, we actually can change the future. We actually can, we can make a different world if we're willing to go through that wound, right? And touch into that pain.
I have a few questions about that, V, but you might want to, if you can't, it's not a big deal, but I don't know if you can unclip the things that are on your sleeve because they're just rustling right next to the microphone. And it's just, no, great. But I'm just thinking about that because that's so powerful. I once interviewed Jerry Adams, who obviously had been a senior figure in the IRA, had been involved allegedly in lots of violence in Northern Ireland. And he was in turn monstrously abused by the British state, tortured. And he talked to me about how he'd forgiven the people who tortured him. And he said, I didn't forgive them for them. I forgave them for me, right? Because carrying that rage would have destroyed me. I'm curious about, so can we explore a bit what this process, what being denied an apology did to you?
Yeah. Well, I think the denial of apology does a lot of things. First of all, you feel gaslit. You feel like if someone's not owning what they've done, when you're a child, so much is blurry, and you make so much blurry because it's so painful. You know what I mean? That you start wondering, did I make this up? Is this real? Did this even happen? Does it matter? Is it inconsequential? If no one's apologizing to you, why is it such a big deal to you and not a big deal to them? It's also a disacknowledgement of your hurt, your suffering, what you've been through, what that suffering turned you into, and what about in your life. it's a form of unlove, right? It's a form of refusal to love someone. And I think by writing his apology, oddly, I mean, I know it sounds really strange, but I really healed a big part of myself. I was able to see where the places I needed him to say what he needed to say. And the imagination is very, very powerful. We underestimate its effects. But if we can imagine this apology so deeply and so profoundly, we actually can shift things inside of us. It is really possible. And I think that's the function of art, isn't it? To write us into another reality, to write us into something other than what is. And I know for me that I can't tell you how deeply I believe in apology. How it's we are flawed human beings. We are deeply imperfect human beings. We're always going to mess up. We're always going to make mistakes with each other. But if we've developed the art of apology and the practice of it, we can apologize, and people will release us and forgive us if we're willing to do that. And then all those harms get dispelled and we go on. If we don't apologize, all those harms just become hard matter, and they become, I don't know, they become cancerous, they become toxic, they are metastasized, right? And then they turn into other things like diseases or wars or, all kinds of complications that wouldn't have to be if people would take responsibility for the things that they did that harmed other people.
And it is one of the things that's so incredibly powerful about reading the book is that it feels astonishingly radical, partly because it's saying, I mean, for lots of reasons, it feels astonishingly radical because it is saying, well, it's one of the most candid discussions of the reality of sexual abuse I've ever read, right? So it's radical just in the extraordinarily detailed and disturbing nature of sexual abuse and what it does to the individual who experiences it. But even more than that, it's radically countercultural, I think, in two ways. One is radically countercultural against patriarchy, right? It's really going to the absolute heart of patriarchy could make a man do this to his daughter, right? To do the most, it can lead to the most debased of outcomes, as it is leading to extraordinarily, well, as it's leading to the ultimate debased outcome of the destruction of the planet, which you've written about so brilliantly elsewhere. But also it feels radically countercultural in an age of, cancel culture is too broad a term, but you have this beautiful line where you say, we've done a lot of work calling men out, which was necessary. Now we need to call them in, right? Because so much of the culture we developed is a culture of banishment, of an apology wouldn't even be accepted, right? So we've so far removed from either a culture of giving apologies or a culture of accepting apologies, with this increasingly hardening. Do you feel that it's countercultural in that third way as well?
Yes, actually, it was Tony Porter who said that thing about we've called men out. Now we know. I think this is what I think. A really interesting thing happened this week. One of my dear friends, Kathy Boudin, died on Monday, and I've been really in deep grief since then. And we did a beautiful tribute to her that came out on our V-Day website yesterday. And a person wrote in, I knew her uncle, and I think it's just wrong that you didn't write what her crime was. Because Kathy had done a crime and she had been in prison for 25 years. And I thought, Kathy went to prison for 25 years. She did her time. And as far as I'm concerned, her crime is done. Like she paid her time. Like in many countries, when you come out of prison, you don't speak about their crime anymore. You're done. You've worked off that crime. And I believe that. I don't think we have to be permanently punished for our bad deeds for eternity, right? I think you can change yourself. You can change who you are. You can change your being, and things can be released. So I think part of what happens in our culture, because we live in America, which is severely punishing. We have more people in our prisons than any place in the world, right? We have a small country that is been placed in prisons that aren't there to be rehabilitated or to be touched or to be talked to or to be worked with. They're just there to be punished. And punishment doesn't change people. It just hardens people and makes people feel more awful and makes people behave badly. So what I feel is this cancel culture is just part of this American punishment mentality. If you say something, it's just the extreme version of it. If you say something I don't like, you're dead. If you do something I don't, it doesn't matter what your history's been. It doesn't matter how many years you've given to a movement or what a good person you've been in your life. One more, off with your head, off with their head, off with their head, right? And I think what I was trying to do in the apology, and some people have been very annoyed with it, that I dare to give voice to a pedophile or dare to give voice to a person who did those kind of terrible deeds. But in fact, if we don't listen, and if we don't let people who have done terrible things begin to process and own and look at and reflect on and dive into what they have done, they will just keep repeating those things, and that karma will just remain here as sticky, toxic tar substance that erodes the culture. You know, I was at Bedford Hills in a writing group that Kathy Boudin was in for 8 years.
Just to say,
And
so that's a prison, yeah.
it's a prison, and every time we met, women would come to that group to deal with their crimes, to go deeply, deeply into who they were, why they did it, what they did, take responsibility. All of the women in my group are out of prison now, except for one, and they're all leading unbelievably wonderful lives of service and love because they grappled with their crimes, because they dealt with their crimes, because they went through that deep, painful, self-hating, guilty, horrible place to reckon with their horrible deeds. And I don't think they'll ever be done with them, that reckoning in their life, but the reckoning was strong enough and vast enough so that they're able to now really live beautiful lives in the culture. And I think that is the function of apologies. We have to find a way to start processing what men have done, what white people have done, what we can go down the list, like what every group has done to some other group to harm them, you know.
That's incredibly powerful. If you think about how far we are from that, it was a really interesting moment I thought about a lot in relation to the apology. There was we talked about this before, V, but so if I remember the details rightly, there's what's the name of the conference that Jude Kelly runs in London every year at this,
Women of the World.
Women of the World, that's it. So if I remember rightly, I might get some of the minor details wrong here, but there was a man, I believe he was Swedish, who raped a woman. And many years later, he collaborated with the woman he had raped to write a book about how he had come to do it and what it had done to her. So an exact model of, I mean, we can't look into his heart. I don't know how sincere his apology was, but as much as we can ask for, he was doing, right? A profound reckoning with the terrible crime he committed. And there were lots of people who protested outside saying, oh, the festival's invited a rapist. How can they have done this? So what would you say to people who are so resistant to this, what seems to me such an important insight about the need for reckoning and apology? What would you say to the people who were protesting outside there?
You know, Johann, everybody's at such different stages of their own recovery, right? I can't tell you that 10 years ago, I would have been happy to know that a person who had raped somebody was being given a platform to talk about it. I wasn't ready. I had so much rage and I had so much stuff I had to go through before I got there. Do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't judge anybody who was outside protesting because I think that's what they needed to do in their process. But what I will say is that if we don't start creating platforms and spaces and ways for people who have done terrible things to begin to come forward to process those things, we will invariably not only repeat those things, but those people will father and have children, and those children will repeat we know that the unexamined history of our parents, our children are acting out in their own ways all the time. So I think we need those platforms. And I think, part of what it means to come forward as a man to talk about being a rapist is that you're going to have to come up against people who are going to be raging you for that. In the same way that as a feminist, when we came out and said we wanted our rights, people raged and stormed at us and said, how dare you? Whenever there is change, you're going to be on the front lines of the people who applaud that and the people who resist you having any kind of platform or any say, because they believe there's people who believe if you've done a crime, you should be punished for eternity. That's it. It's very, it's very like you're done. I don't believe that, because I think what I've learned spending years in prison, it's so easy for a crime to happen. You just need circumstances. It could be poverty. It could be that you've grown up abused and abused and abused. It could be that someone's been beating and beating you. There wasn't a woman in my group who I didn't come to understand why she had committed her crime. And in some cases, I was amazed they didn't kill more people after everything they'd been through, to be honestly.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, because we absolutely know that there's really interesting experimental evidence that what you're saying is true. So the United States has a prison system, as everyone watching knows, built almost entirely around severe forms of punishment. In fact, there's been such an enormous amount of rape of men in prisons that by some estimates, the United States may be the first society ever where more men have been raped than women, because so many people are imprisoned and so many of them are raped, right? So we can see you've got one system that's based around horrific violence, infliction of pain and suffering, right? Let's look at the Norwegian prison system. The Norwegian prison system used to be like that. And it was a disaster. They had extraordinarily high levels of reoffending, so they entirely redesigned the Norwegian prison system. I've spent a fair bit of time in Norwegian prisons, not because I've committed any crimes in Norway, but for research for a future book. And so it's all about, there's a good documentary about this called Big Boys Don't Cry that people can watch, where people who committed the most terrible crimes, the first thing you're told when you go into prison in Norway is, one day you're going to get out of here and you're going to be my neighbor. So my job is to help you change. So the US has a 75% recidivism rate for people released from prison. 75% of people leave prison and commit another crime. So prisons fail catastrophically. Norway, 25% recidivism rate, right? So we know some people may think, oh, it's a bit understandably, and it's a very important point you're making as a corrective about different people are at different stages. So some people understandably go, well, this is making excuses. You go, no, this is actually part of accountability. This is the heart. It's not a choice between expecting an apology. An apology doesn't mean a get out of jail free card, right? Quite the opposite. Is that fair to say, V? It's a form of deep accountability.
Exactly. I think one of the things we don't understand about apologies is that, we teach prayer, right? We teach meditation. We teach processes that to me, there is nothing more deep, complex than apology. And there's 4 stages to it, and it takes a long time, and you have to give yourself fully to it. It's not, I'm sorry if I hurt you. It's not, I'm sorry if that felt bad. It's really a deep, deep, deep process of self-reflection and ownership and looking deeply into your soul to really reflect deeply on what you've done and how to own that. And I think if we taught people how to apologize, right? Like one of the things I'm really keen about is like, how do we work with groups and teach the method of apology, teach the process of apology? Because I think then, if I had my way, like if I had my system of my legal system, what it would be is that you would go into some kind of holding center, a place when you've committed a crime, and you would have therapy regularly, you would have groups regularly, you would have writing groups regularly, you would be confronted on a daily basis about your crime, you would have to work on your crime, you would have to work on yourself, and it could take years, it could take months, it could take whatever it took, and then you would be put in front of a group of community peers, psychologists and artists and thinkers, and they would ask you questions. And those questions would see how deep your reflection had been, how deep you had gone into now we have parole boards, but I don't think they're designed, to some degree they can, and they do sometimes spot somebody who may have done the work or not done the work, but we don't have a system that's designed around care and designed around taking responsibility and designed around self-transformation, which would make people ready to be back in the world, and also which would make the people look. If I were, my father raped me, my father abused me, I don't want my father to live in prison for the rest of his life. I don't want my father to be beaten. I want my father to deal with what he did to me. I want my father to cry about it. I want my father to feel it. I want my father to know it. I want my father to be able to say to me, oh my God, I was this person. And to know that he feels my hurt and to know that he understands the impact that had on me. If that happens, I'm done. I'm done. You're free. We're done. I don't want to become that person who's going to punish you for eternity, because that changes me. That changes who I am, you know?
That's so powerful. Just thinking about what you're saying, because it comes through so clearly in the book as well, that how would I put it? That the untreated wounds of your father were what he was trying to transfer onto you. This fear of his own, this fear that he hasn't achieved what he wants. He's always calling you stupid because when you were achieving, because of course that's his fear, right? His fear of himself. That these there's that famous phrase, you'll know who said it first. I don't, hurt people. But we have this model that's so about inflicting more pain on people. I'll never forget, for my book about addiction, Chasing the Scream, I went out with a group of women who were made to go out from a prison. They were women who had addiction problems, and they were made to go out on a chain gang wearing t-shirts saying I was a drug addict, while members of the public mocked them and jeered at them. And the guy who ran those prisons at the time, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who was actually later found to have committed crimes himself and pardoned by Trump, he spent some time with Sheriff Joe. So he was, I've really thought about him a lot as I was reading the apology. So Sheriff Joe was the youngest of 9 children, and his parents were very passionate Catholics, and they were told when she was pregnant with Joe, you must have an abortion because you'll die in childbirth. And they said, no, it's wrong. And they prayed. And as the doctors predicted, she died in childbirth. So Joe Arpaio was raised his whole childhood being told by his dad and his siblings, you killed our mother, right? And being beaten by them and told, you killed our mother. Now, does that exculpate the terrible things that Joe Arpaio did to those women? Of course not. But it transforms how you see it, right? And it's so fascinating when I think about the work you did at Bedford Falls, and of course it's very moving to talk about this in the week in which Kathy Boudin passed away. It feels to me, and obviously something you argue very strongly in the book in a different way, the women, it doesn't surprise me that the women who'd committed these crimes could apologize and could reckon with what they'd done. In a way, women are taught to apologize for themselves from the minute they're born, right? What's so interesting is that what you show so powerfully is the kind of intellectual infrastructure that is installed in boys that I felt being installed in me, that prevents them doing what those women did in Bedford Falls. Yeah. Does that ring true to you, Eve?
Yes. And I'm glad you're saying that, because some people have said to me, women don't need to learn how to apologize any more than we already have. All we've said our life is, I'm sorry. But that was my mantra when I was a child. I'm sorry I was bored. I'm sorry I'm here. I'm sorry I exist, right? But I think this is what I believe. I believe that if men could really begin to enter into an apology process, the whole world would change overnight. I just know it. I don't even believe it. I know it. It is something I know, because what's almost, look, if you look at everything that's pushing back against everything, when you look at men who have done terrible things, like even just looking at Trump, for example, 40 women, I think, have accused him of sexual assault. He bragged about grabbing a woman's genitals 2 weeks before he got elected. There's been no accountability whatsoever. We've got Brett Kavanaugh, who it's very clear, in my opinion, that he sexually abused, I'm going to block her name out, but
yeah, I know him. Yeah,
it just flew out of my head. It's very clear to me that Clarence Thomas abused, sexually harassed Anita Hill. Those men have literally constructed the core right now of the Supreme Court that is legislating what is going to happen to women's bodies. Okay? So at the core of the Supreme Court, we have sexual abusers scaling up behavior that they haven't addressed, Scaling up behavior they have never been forced to be accountable for, right? So what are they doing? They're taking away our bodily autonomy. They're taking away the right to our own bodies, which they did to other women in their lives, right? Through sexual abuse. And you see how throughout the culture, in every direction, that lack of accountability is playing out over and over and over. You know,
that's so interesting. Yeah, it's very powerful, and it's something that really, I mean, The Apology is such a radical book because as you read it, you truth of what you said, you feel, why have I never heard anyone do this, even for much less heinous crimes than, why have if we think about public apologies, we can think about, I don't know, Bill Clinton's kind of rage-filled apology after what
but
we
it
all
wasn't really
remember.
an apology, was it?
Exactly. It's a sort of, well, he pointedly did not apologize to Monica Lewinsky, the woman he treated
He didn't
worse.
apologize. Oh.
Yeah. It was a sort of, I apologize to my wife and to God, was basically the gist of what he said, but not to the woman whose life had been ruined.
He didn't come out and say the details of what he had done. He wasn't specific in it. He didn't. No.
And essentially, even if we think about much more minor apologies, if we think about, so when President Obama was first elected and he expressed some very mild regret for something the US had done in foreign policy, and the big attack line on him from the Republicans for a really long time was, oh, he's on an apology tour. That was their go-to insult, right?
Oh, yes. It was like the most emasculating. It was, it's so funny. What I say in the book is like, once you say one apology, the whole story begins to crumble. The whole patriarchy begins to tumble down, because once one admits it, right, then everybody knows they have to start doing the same thing. As long as everybody holds rank, holds in, I was thinking about Cosby, for example, right? And what is it, 50 or 60 women, right, had the same story. Like
he admitted on tape he had done. Right?
Okay, he's out of prison. Okay, he's never not only owned it, he's still claiming that he's innocent. Now, what does that tell the culture? What does that do to the culture? Not only the 60 women who have put themselves out there and have had to expose themselves and go through that horrible process and all of those things, but it's saying to the culture, don't tell the truth, because the truth just works against you. It doesn't ever bring justice. I mean, I can go through so many examples in history of women who have come forward to tell the truth with no accountability, beginning with the comfort women during the World War II, where the Japanese raped them for, months and months and held them in, rape camps, essentially, right? And brothels. And the Japanese government has still not apologized, right? Because to do that would begin to unravel how many other things have you done? How many other things are you responsible for? And then you're basically saying to all your other male compatriots, you are responsible too. And then you're going to be thrown out of the kingdom of men, right? You're not going to be part of that story anymore. So what we need is brave men. We need men who are going to be willing to come forward and break the cycle and really speak to what needs to be spoken to so we can all get free,
Yeah. We're going to go to some questions in a minute. Just curious, is it fair to say that patriarchy and apology are opposites?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Because you know why I would say that? What is an apology? It's a humbling. It's an equaling. It's, I am on the same place as you. There's no hierarchy in an apology. Patriarchy is based on hierarchy. Once you apologize, you have stepped it down to become part of the circle. And patriarchy doesn't exist in a circle. Patriarchy exists in a line, right? So I would say that the opposite of patriarchy is apology. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so moving. So we're going to take some questions. I think Nick is going to, the brilliant guy at Book Passage, who also has a very impressive beard. I'm very jealous of him, because if I try and grow a beard, it looks like a child has drawn on my face. I think has some questions for us. I think Nick, I don't know if Nick's going to put them in the the little chat box while he does. And
There's
if
some
anyone wants to submit any,
right now.
I'll have some come up. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm technologically incompetent. I can see it, but I can only see one thing in there. I can. Oh yes, I see it. Yeah, I'm so sorry. That is my incompetence. Yeah. Cheers, Nick. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah. So someone has said here, thank you, V. I've felt for a while the need to make art about parts of my past. I've not felt ready for a long time. I feel ready now. Yet when I sit down to do it, I'm terrified to face it. I'm trying to be brave. Have you ever encountered something like this? And do you have any advice for how to navigate this in moments of attempted creation?
Oh God, yes, I've experienced that. Yeah. Oh my God. I don't know about you, Johann, but I don't think I've ever written a book when I've sat down to write it when I wasn't absolutely terrified to confront whatever it is I'm confronting, and I think that's just part of the process. And I think one of the things I tell myself, and I think it's helpful, is like, I think often we have somebody on our shoulder who is from our past, or for whoever was the most judgmental person in our life, right? Or whoever is the most judgmental person in the world. And that person is judging whatever we're writing, right? Oh, how can you say that? You shouldn't say that. It's terrible. You don't care. And what I try to do is this. I say to myself, write whatever you want now, write it all. And then when you put it into the world, then you can think whether you're going to say everything that you've said in this moment and whether you're going to put that into the world. So I give myself the freedom to do everything privately while I'm writing it. So I don't have to deal with that thing on my shoulder until later when it comes out into the world. And I think the other thing I want to say is, we're all so trained in this country not to feel pain. And yet, right, we're the most medicated, we're the most drug addicted, we're the most food addicted, we're the most addicted, anything to get away from pain, because Americans aren't supposed to feel pain, right? Everybody else in the world can feel pain, but we can't feel pain, right? I just want to say that the way I've grown in my life, the way I've become myself in my life, the way I've connected with people in my life is through pain. And that's not to say we should stay in pain, but I think this kind of avoidance of pain, of this worry that our children are too fragile to hear the truth, that they might be upset, that they might be guilty. Our children are already upset. They live in the world. They suck in the oxygen. They feel the toxicity. They're already upset. They know what's going on. Part of what we have to teach our children is how to transform pain, how to feel pain and turn it into something that's productive and creative and artistic, rather than barricading themselves against pain and never wanting to go and touch it. Because the truth of the matter is, if you're willing to walk through the wound is a portal. It is a portal. There is a doorway. You can get to the other side. But if you sit outside it, you just sit in the kind of toxic shit that's pouring down from the sky. If you go through the portal, you get through the pain. And so, I just say, like, start a little bit at a time, go at it every day, begin to just work your way into it, and know that there's not a writer worth their salt who hasn't felt terrified to enter the pain. When I wrote the apology, I was so terrified. I think terror was like driving me. And yet it was also like so exhilarating once I began to touch into what I was touching into. And I knew someplace that this could be a path to liberation,
Yeah. It's always revealing, when you speak to someone who's a writer and they're not anxious and they're not frightened, almost like, well, your book's going to be shit then, right? That is precisely, yeah, be worried if you're not terrified, don't be worried if you are. Paula asks, are there moments in the world today when you see the progress on the destruction of or lessening of patriarchal thinking? Thank you for being here today.
Oh, Paula, this is not a good day to be asking me that question. Paula, I think this is how I feel about patriarchy. I feel it's like herpes. Okay. I feel it's always there, and it can become dormant. And when the conditions are vulnerable, when the conditions are low, it comes back with a vengeance, right? Do I believe in my heart of hearts that as a system, we can dismantle it? Of course I do, because it's just a story, right? It's only 17,000 years old. It isn't that old. right? It isn't when you think about the story of the world, right? And part of me thinks, right now, I was writing something today and about what happened yesterday with Roe versus Wade. And I was saying, it's 50 years later. We aren't who we were, women, 50 years ago. We direct movies and we run companies and we write novels and we're war correspondents, and we're not going back. That's not happening. We are now the world. You can't turn that around. That has changed. But what we haven't done yet is dismantle the system so that the system keeps coming back at us, and the people who are still participating in that system, who are carrying the system, keep coming back at us. So part of it is like we have to go the distance now and make a decision whether we really want to live in an entirely new paradigm, a new mindset, which is not about some of the people at the very top controlling the rest of the people, some of the people at the top dominating, some of the people at the top controlling and determining the lives, the gender, the bodies, the welfare of the other people. And part of us, all of us, has to look at how are we attached to patriarchy? How are we still embedded in it? How do we still believe that the father is going to come rescue us? Even though in my case, my father was just destroying me, right? There's still a deep belief, this fantasy that like the padre, the father is going, the patriarch is somehow almighty. And when everything in our lives has shown us that is not true, right? Patriarchy has brought us right where we are, on the verge of the earth being destroyed, on the verge of massive inequality, economic inequality and poverty worldwide. I'm not even going to go down the list of terrible things. So part of it is, we all have to commit deeper in our thoughts, in our being, in the way we live, to the dismantling of it. And so I don't know that until the whole system goes down, like, is there real progress? Yes, we are smarter, we are more able, we are more present, we are more empowered to dismantle patriarchy. That's what I would say.
I'm curious, V, that for people, anyone watching who doesn't know, I'm gay, and I've really realized how much I've overgeneralized from the gay experience in my expectations, right? Because of course the experience of my lifetime has been staggering and unthinkable progress in ways I could not have conceived of when I was 15 years old, right? Which wasn't that long ago. I'm 43 now. Why do you think it's been, I don't want to dispute there's still lots of issues with homophobia, of course, and as we're seeing with the things, with the events in Florida at the moment, but why do you think it was so much easier to overcome millennia of homophobia than to overcome millennia of misogyny?
Well, I think there's a lot of different reasons for it. I don't know if I would guess. I mean, I think there were a lot of, to be honest with you, men who had a lot of power, who were leading those movements, right? So they were already entrenched in power bases, right? So they were able to demand rights because they had economic power and they had all kinds of power that allowed that to happen. But I also think we can't be so secure in all those rights, because if you look at what's happening right now, after the Supreme Court has its way with abortion, they're moving on to marriage equality. They will, and if you look at state by state, what's happening, there are now states where it's illegal to be gay again, right? I think, yes, I think that gay rights have forged ahead, and to a large degree, women's rights have too. I mean, I don't want to diminish our progress, but as long as there is patriarchy, there is the possibility that all those rights will be undone, because that's what patriarchy does, right? It doesn't want the assertion of any other groups, of any other people, to have equal power, right, in these systems, and equal presence, equal anything. And so I don't know that anything is sure within this mindset, right?
Yeah, that's a very sobering thought. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. Can we talk a little bit about, I think obviously we've touched on it a bit in this conversation, but so the events of the last few days, the leaking of the fact that the overturning of Roe versus Wade appears to be imminent. What are you reflecting, V? What are you thinking about at this historic and horrendous moment?
Well, I'm in a rage. I'm just in a rage, and I think our fury is really important right now. But I can tell you, as surely as I know anything, we're not going back. This is not going to happen. You can't, once you have tasted the sweetness of freedom, once you know that your body is yours, and we've had 50 years of this, we are not going back. And if it means that every woman and man who was with us in this struggle, as they should be, because this is your issue, it's not just ours. If it means that we simply stop participating in the society and we refuse to work and we refuse to do anything until it changes, we will do that. We are not going back. And I think every person out there now has to be bold and daring, because what I want to say is, if they eviscerate, if they come and destroy this law, if they think they have moral authority over our bodies, they will start to have that authority over everything. It will spread to every community. It will spread to the gay community. It will spread to the Black community. It will just be the beginning of the unraveling of all the rights we have fought for the last years and years and years. And I actually think this could be the moment where we come out of our silos, where we understand that the struggle for bodily autonomy and gender autonomy and to live in this country as a Black person without fear of being shot by the police, where we can know that teaching about racism and our history is critical, where to live as a transgender person or to live as a gay person is a right to determine who you are. All of these issues are the same story. They're not separate. And maybe this will be the moment where we unite, where we understand that we are in this together and that we are not going to be pushed back into the dark ages, that it's not going to happen. That's where I am today, and I'm staying there.
Hooray. I feel slightly better now. Well, this has been such a joy. I'm going to hand back to Cheryl in a second, but thank you to Book Passage, which is a fantastic bookstore. And most of all, thank you to Eve for all the incredible work you do. It's so inspiring. It inspires me every day, and I'm so honored to know you. And
I just want to say to you, you're amazing. Your questions were amazing. This conversation has been one of my most favorite conversations. I love you with all my heart. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm too British to accept an apology, to accept either make an apology or accept a compliment, but I will do my best. I'll do what
Carol's holding up the book.
the Queen's face would always be when you give her a compliment. So I was like, yes. Just as a kind of frozen yes. So Charlotte's holding up the book. Anyone who hasn't read it, I'm about to swear, sorry, I'm sure Brian went to. It's such a great book and so powerful. I've given that book to so many people, and every single person I've given it to, with the pointed exception of one man who I think felt really guilty and traumatized by it, all of them have come back to me and said, wow, this is so good. So yeah, order it from Book Passage, order all your books from Book Passage, and I'll hand back to you, Cheryl. Thanks so much.
Thank you. This is a fabulous, fabulous book. It is, and it's in paperback, so it's not going to break the bank. So make sure you buy multiple copies. It's a perfect gift to give to many. I know I can think about 5 people who really, this book would change their life. I mean, really, it'd be a very helpful book. And V, that end, your rally, your call to rally at the end, oh my goodness, I can't think of a better way to, end this event and, get us all pumped up and motivated. I agree. We have a challenge in front of us. And thank you so much for, drumming up the enthusiasm and support, and we can all get on the same, page and get out there and fight for the rights. So, yep. So again, thank you so much. You are extremely inspiring. We are so honored to have you. And of course, Johann, this was great. You did a great job. And thank you to all our loyal customers out there and any new people out there listening. This is Book Passage signing off. Get the book, The Apology. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Recording stop.